Hi, I'm Rochelle Riley, and I was asked to talk to you about the early years at the Daily Tar Heel where I spent as a cub reporter. I was asked what drew me to it. Well, it's the same thing that drew me to Carolina. I never wanted to be anything but a journalist from the time I was 8 years old, and that's why I chose Carolina, and it was the only college I applied to. And being a journalist, being a real journalist for the campus paper was one of the highlights of my life because everything there led to everything I was able to do later. I was a cub reporter who, quite frankly, got such a thrill out of walking around with my skinny notebook, getting into people's business, asking questions, and dreaming of one day, being Bob Woodward, or Bobby Woodward. When I think about the types of things I've gotten to do as a journalist, the list is endless. I've covered political conventions and presidential campaigns. I interviewed Barack Obama in the Roosevelt Room of the White House. I went to Kenya with a group of surgeons who did 80 surgeries over 3 days at a clinic in a tiny village where people didn't have access to a doctor. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. I've also written stories that change people's lives, that lead to change laws. It's about making a difference. The advice that I'd have for my 18-year-old self is don't sweat the small stuff. Focus on the big picture. Focus on what you want to be. I managed to do that, and quite frankly, maybe I was listening to my 18-year-old self because I did pretty much everything I wanted to do. I was asked what it was like growing up in a tiny town and headed to Carolina and then doing all the things I got to do later. And I can tell you it was quite a surprise for me and the people. Well, actually, the people around me weren't that surprised. They always tell me, we knew that that was what was coming for you. But I grew up in Tarboro, North Carolina. It's a little town of, 10,000 people. There were 10,000 people there when I grew up there. There are 10,000 people there now. Not the same 10,000 people. And it was an amazing time for me because it was when I was really, really afraid that I was missing the action by being in a little town instead of being in Washington or New York. But what it taught me to do was to be a better writer. And so by the time I got to Carolina and people like Harry Amana and Raleigh Mann taught me how to take that instinct for interviewing people and getting information and turning it into stories, I knew that I had found my calling. One of the most important things that I've done over the course of my career is to nurture and mentor young journalists, particularly young journalists of color, because we cannot have a responsible press and an accurate press without a diverse press. Diversity has become such a dirty word that people don't pay attention to what it really means. And it just means making sure that the people covering a community reflect that community so that you wind up having stories that are richer and deeper and truer and contextual than having, sort of boys on the bus mentality and everybody trying to write the same story or tell the same story or record the same story. It's sometimes hard for me to talk about journalism's future because I was worried about it for a while, but then it dawned on me, even if every newspaper dies, even if journalism totally changes, it will come back. It will start the same way that it did a long time ago, with small papers and small journals and small radio shows in towns and cities across the country who will want to serve the people of that community the way they want to be served, telling them about what's happening in their lives and what they're doing. And all of a sudden we'll have this great resurgence. And we'll have the types of coverage and papers and radio stations and even television stations perhaps that we used to have. If not, we will still find ways to tell the story even in a digital age.